Hi everybody. Um, I know I'm looking a bit weird this afternoon, but as we had a party last night, and the theme was tacky tourists, and this is what I look like. Actually, although the shirt has a somewhat macabre pattern, I actually really like it. I got it from the local Goodwill store, and I don't think anybody's ever worn it. It's brand new, and it's nice material, and I rather like it, so I think I'll wear it more often in future. And of course, being a tacky tourist, I had to wear some kind of shades, and they had to be tacky. And these are my cycling goggles, and I thought they look good. They look good on a bike, but off the bike they do look a little weird. So I'll take them off. Okay, this is actually the next episode of my autobiography, and it concerns my emotional development as a teenager. And I've already dealt with, to a certain extent, how my mental understanding of spirituality came about. That's obviously an ongoing situation, as indeed is the evolution of all parts of my personality and my spiritual being. But so, as I said, I've already dealt with, to a certain extent, the beginnings of my intellectual understanding of spirituality. And then I did actually two verbal videos, and one which was more image orientated concerning my physical development in my period of athleticism as a teenager, which got me to the point where I had a pretty strong and well-conditioned physical framework, and obviously had extended myself in the course of my athleticism to the point where I really understood and could feel and take joy in how my body works, the physical aspect. And now I'm going to deal with the third aspect of my personality, which is the emotional body. And, the emotional body is what motivates us. It's the intellectual is how we think we are, and the emotional body is how we feel about who we are and how we feel about who we think we are. Anyway, enough of that. It sounds like it's getting into a bit of a tongue twister. And suffice it to say that I have a highly active emotional body, as I hope everybody does. And as I already mentioned in one of my earlier episodes, that I actually had my first girlfriend when I was really very young. I was about 8, and obviously that wasn't a very serious relationship, but it was an introduction to feelings of caring for and looking after my girlfriend. And I'm heterosexual, but I have no preferences really in either in regard to who people love, as long as they love, and if people want to remain single, that's fine too. You don't have to, as long as you manifest love. But most people manifest love in a relationship with another human being. And I really had my first serious girlfriend when I must have been, I guess, 13 at high school, and I took a particular shine to a very beautiful and interesting and intelligent girl that was in our class, and she reciprocated. I don't know if she felt the same way about me quite, but probably not, but because her attributes were obviously different from mine. But she was definitely my girlfriend, and I definitely fell in love with her. And of course, being a teenager of that age, I was totally intoxicated by the idea of femininity and getting close to a woman, a young woman. It was wonderful. I just couldn't believe it, and we our relationship lasted about 3 years altogether. I was more focused on cycling than probably anything else, and I remember telling her at one point that, if I had to choose between cycling and her, I might choose cycling, which, in retrospect was not really, well, it was honest anyway, so I think that was fair, but I think, I think eventually that this brought about our breakup. Um, our breakup actually really occurred because she found somebody else who was more sophisticated, older, had more going for him, and was obviously a better choice than myself. So that was okay, but it affected me enormously. When we broke up, I just was, I was a damp rag. I was just an emotional wreck at the time, and it took me quite some time to recover. And I even while I was going through that, I was aware that the feelings I had and the sort of emotional collapse I was going through was actually fairly normal for someone in my position, for someone, who was still basically a fairly young person with not a lot of experience of relationships. So I was, if you like, my higher self was aware that my personality was, although it was going through a difficult emotional period, it was actually quite normal. So although my personality was definitely upset, my higher self just went, well, what do you expect? This is quite normal. Don't worry about it. You'll get over it, kind of thing. And sure enough, I did. And anyway, as I mentioned in my episode about cycling, when I was 18, I went to Belgium to try and become a professional cyclist, and fairly quickly came to the conclusion that I wasn't going to make much of a living as a professional cyclist, even if I would ever be good enough to even turn professional, which was definitely doubtful. So when I came back from Belgium, I raced in one more race, and then I hung my racing shoes up and quit cycle racing, and actually moved up to London on my own and rented a little apartment. Well, actually shared an apartment, I should say. We rented a room in a shared apartment in Earl's Court in the west of London. A very happening place. Oh my God, it was great to be there, and it was very exciting. And I fairly quickly after I got there got another girlfriend, which of course was also the right way to sort things out. And I got a very beautiful American girlfriend, and we lived together for, I don't know, 6 months or so, and I fell madly in love with her, and she was very beautiful and very sweet, and that was great. And of course this was in 1960, the end of 1965, beginning of 1966, when hippies were starting to make their appearance on the scene in large numbers, and I embraced that completely. I thought hippies were really cool. The mods, the people called mods in England were also quite prevalent just prior to the hippies, and the mods wore rather smart but often quite outrageous clothes, and rode motor scooters and that kind of thing, and wore their hair long. And I dabbled in that a little bit, although it didn't quite seem my thing. But I was trying to be cool, and I had long hair, and I had a nice little job in the West End of London. It wasn't actually a very nice little job, but it was a job anyway. And when you're 18, you don't really care. A job's a job, and I was out there being cool in the West End of London with a cool girlfriend and beautiful long blonde hair, and things were good. But then after about 6 months, my girlfriend went down to the local laundromat with the clothes to do our washing, and when she came back, I remember I could feel something had changed, but she didn't let on, and although I could feel something had changed, it wasn't particularly apparent. But then, shortly after that, within a few days, rather quickly in the circumstances, she took another load of washing down to the laundromat. And then when she came back, things were definitely different between us. And I said, like, what's going on? And things are not vibing the same. And she said, well, she'd met somebody down at the laundromat that she really liked. He was a nice guy. And I went, oh, yeah, okay. Fortunately, I don't fly into jealous rages or anything. I've always thought jealousy was completely pointless because it's counterproductive. And, if your girlfriend says she's met somebody that's really nice, to put him down and scream and get angry and crazy is just going to push her out the door towards this new fellow she's met. So I was understanding. I said, okay, what's he like, and that, and she told me, and he was cool. He was older than I was. He had longer hair than I was. He had a car, or the use of a car, a nice car, which I didn't have. And he played in a rock and roll band. Oh my God! I mean, I couldn't compete with this, and I knew that he was actually cooler than I was. I also knew that, or hoped that in a year or two I'd be as cool as he was. But at the time, I was not as cool as he was. So being very understanding and knowing that I should try and control my emotional collapse, I said, okay, I guess you're going to be moving out and moving in with them, kind of thing. And it's been great. But it affected me enormously. Once again, I went through an emotional collapse where I'd sit at the desk at work, not being able to concentrate on anything, and having lost my sparkle, just sit there sort of moping and, oh God, and feeling down, and as if, I'd been run over by a bus. And that went on for about a month or more, for 4 or 5 weeks at least. And I remember thinking, this is ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. You're not helping the situation. You're not going to get her back. And what she did was perfectly understandable, and she didn't do it to hurt me. This is absolutely ridiculous. Why are you feeling so crushed? Why have you lost your inner strength? This is not acceptable. So I decided then and there that I was not going to get into another relationship, certainly not intentionally, until I could control my emotions, until I could get into, and more importantly, get out of a meaningful, a beautiful relationship without undergoing an emotional and mental collapse. Because I wasn't any good to anybody in this situation, and if you're not careful, this kind of thing can lead to low self-esteem and even depression. And I was aware of that, and I said, well, I'm not going to do that. So I decided I was not going to get into a relationship, a meaningful relationship, with anyone until I could build myself up and understand myself and take control of my personality to the extent whereby I could get out of such a relationship without any mental collapse. I understood from an intellectual point of view what was required of me, and that when relationships broke up, it didn't mean that I was useless or no good, or that it was just things that happened. Partners, before you're married, and of course after you're married as well, your partner might meet up with somebody else who just completely knocks their socks off, and that's what happens. So anyway, the upshot of this was that I actually, after about a year and a half in London, I actually moved to North America. I had an older brother in Montreal, and he paid for my ticket to come over in August, the end of August 1967, to see Expo 67 in Montreal. John, my older brother, lived in Montreal and had done since 1960, I think, and he was well established. And anyway, he bought me a plane ticket to go over to Montreal, which was wonderful because I'd actually already had a hankering to go to Canada, because I knew Canada was a huge, beautiful country with lots of lakes and rivers and mountains and wilderness, and I yearned for wilderness ever since I was a little boy. I sort of envisaged myself a bit of an explorer, and so I was very, very happy to go to Montreal, and I got a job at Expo, working in the La Ronde, which is the carnival section, the fairground section. I got a job working there. That's another story that does not actually concern my emotional evolution, but it's an interesting story about my time in Montreal, and I will certainly tell that story in another episode. But basically, I had a great time in Montreal. I met some wonderful people. By then I was a fully fledged hippie, and had even experimented with a little bit of hashish in London, which was not only hard to avoid, it was also very interesting. I've got this adventurous streak in me, and I'll try anything if I don't think it will cause me any permanent damage. And so I was a fully fledged hippie when I arrived in Montreal, with Levi needle cord pants with a V in the bottom of the leg with a piece of brightly coloured paisley pattern, I think. I was the genuine article let into this side to make them into bell bottoms, and I wore high-topped desert boots, and I had long hair, and I had sideburns that came down to here, and then I had a moustache, which just linked up to the sideburns. So I was pretty cool, and so I had a great time in Montreal, met some wonderful people, hung around with musicians, did have some contact with the opposite sex, but never had a girlfriend as such, because number one, it just didn't happen, and number two, I was not ready yet. I knew I didn't have complete control over my emotions, and I fell in love all the time from a visual aspect, something that I still do, and what can you say about that? I'm a man, but I hung around. I actually got a job working in a club called the New Penelope, which was a coffee house that was only open for about 6 months at that time. And I have to emphasize that Montreal, in the winter of 1967, was probably the place to be in North America. It was a jumping, happening place, and I actually worked in the New Penelope club. I think it was on Dorchester Street. And they had fantastic music there. It was a coffee house, for God's sake, run by a wonderful fellow called Gary Eisencraft. And I believe his mother was some kind of theatrical agent in New York, and she channeled musical acts that she figured would suit the New Penelope up into Montreal. And so, although this was a coffee house without a license, and it was rather small and stuff, we had groups like the Mothers of Invention, the Fugs, the Seagull Fall Blues Band, Sonny Terry and Brownie McGee came there a lot, a very young Joni Mitchell, and who else was there? Oh God, there were lots. The Fugs, I think I already mentioned. Howlin' Wolf almost came. There was a wonderful group called the Steve Miller Band, which was not the Steve Miller we all think of, but it was a band from Chicago, and they were great fun and really good musicians, with a Hammond B3 organ howling away so that I had a great time, lots of good music and lots of parties, and met some wonderful people and thoroughly enjoyed myself. But I always wanted to go out to BC, to the mountains of BC and the rivers, and see that. So as soon as I got to Canada pretty well, I applied for my landed status, and after about 5.5 months, I actually did get my immigrant papers to stay in Canada. And as soon as I got those, I hitchhiked out west to BC with a student friend of mine, and this is another story that I will fill in at a later date. and I worked in BC on pipelines, which is it's a way to get out into the bush, which is what I wanted, and also a way to work hard and make good money. And I did that, and I was in BC for about a year or so, off and on. The pipelines tend to be contracts you work on for a few weeks and then take a break and then work on another contract. And anyway, I ended up on one of my breaks between pipelines in Victoria on Vancouver Island, where I met a very interesting fellow by the name of Igor. And he was an American, but he'd been raised he'd been raised in Paris for most of his younger years, and it was a very interesting fellow, to say the least, and was a musician. And he was heading up to the North Slope in Alaska, because 1969 was when the North Slope was opening up by the oil companies, and he wanted to head up there. He was a very adventurous person, and he figured that, you know, being an adventurous person, he should head up to the North Slope and get a job and make lots of money on the oil fields, and then head off into the wide blue yonder doing crazy things. And I thought, well, that sounds kind of fun, and Igor and I got along pretty good, so I headed up to Alaska with him, and I ended up in Alaska, where I stayed for 2 years. And neither of us actually got up to the North Slope, because we were about a year too early. The slope was not actually up and running. It was just being discovered and just being opened up. But there wasn't a lot of jobs available at that time. So I had various jobs. We both lived in Anchorage, Alaska, which is a wonderful experience. It's a beautiful town. At the time it wasn't too big population-wise, and I'm assuming it's still not. And it's got beautiful mountains to the east of it, which light up magnificently at sunset. And then to the west there's a fairly large inlet, expanse of water called Cook Inlet, and then beyond that is another set of mountains. And they're illuminated by the dawn. And of course, Anchorage being so far north, in the summer the sunsets start at about 9:30 and they go on till about midnight. And then there's about half an hour or 45 minutes of not complete darkness by any means, and then the dawn starts up, because it's almost 24-hour daylight. And so in the summer the city is bathed every night in this beautiful, like almost continuous sunset into dawn, and everybody gets so energized and so high. It's just great. And anyway, I was up there with my friend Igor, and we made some wonderful friends of like-minded people, a lot of them coming up from the lower 48, and at the time Anchorage had, I believe, 7 men for every woman, which meant, you know, it was good for the women, but it wasn't so good for the men. And but the hippies, well, I have to say the hippies had it good. We were pretty evenly, numerically we were pretty even, and the young hippie ladies were just very impressive people, and I fell in love, of course. I'm sort of in a state of more or less permanent being in love with my fellow human beings, but of course that's a universal aspect and not so personal. But anyway, to continue on my emotional development, there was a charming lady that I met who was a Virgo. I'm a Sagittarius. These things are very important for hippies, of course. And but she was very sweet woman, and I just felt so bathed in her sweetness and gentleness, and I thought, yes, you know, I can have a relationship with her, and I felt strong enough to have a relationship. I felt I was in control of my emotions enough. I felt strong enough in my personal being to get into a relationship without any dire consequences should it not continue. So I sort of, this beautiful lady lived with 2 other beautiful ladies too in a house, and of course me and my friends, we used to go over there and smoke a few doobies and listen to music and generally have fun. And enjoy each other's company, and I obviously was making moves towards her, and she liked me. She realized that I was a gentleman, and so we sort of hit it off, but it never completely gelled. I wanted it to, but there was something that wasn't. She didn't quite want it to. And I remember one night I was over there, we went over there, and I'd sort of got the feeling that I was going to get the green light. Yeah. And so I went over there, and I hung around quite late. I had a little car at the time, a little Volkswagen, of course, hippies, and I was hanging around there, and about 1:45 or something, she said, I'm going up to bed now. And I thought, oh, this is, maybe I'm going up there too, and she said, you can sleep on the couch if you like. And I thought, oh, I guess it's not happening, and I thought, well, that's too bad. I wonder what the problem is, I'm game, and she's almost game, but not quite. What's going on, So anyway, I did sleep on the couch, which is okay, and I accepted it and everything. And in the morning we were having breakfast, and I was talking with her, and I said, what's happening? And she said, well, I like you, and you're a nice guy and all that, but I'm in love with Tom. And I said, ooh, okay, Tom, the Tom I'm thinking of. And there was this very nice man called Tom who was in partnership with some other very nice hippies who ran what we called a head shop at the time in Anchorage called the Aquarian Age, I think it was. And it was a great place. It was a nice, really nice place. It stank of patchouli oil and incense, and it was just all together and a great place to be. And they had some very nice stuff, and it was a successful business. And Tom was one of the people who worked in the shop, and he was a very nice guy, just really a nice guy. And anyway, my lady friend said she was in love with Tom, but she was shy. And this is something I've always taken a shine to. I've always liked people who were a bit shy, rather than being pushy. I tend to be attracted to those who are not pushy, who are a bit shy. So she said she really wanted to meet Tom, but didn't know how to meet him because he was shy and that kind of thing. So I said, okay. When we finished breakfast, I said, okay, let's get in the car and I'll take you out and hook you up with Tom. So we got in the Beetle and beetled on out of town to where Tom lived in this cabin, and we parked the car at the bottom of the hill and we walked up the path to Tom's cabin, and I knocked with my lady, with this lady in tow, and I knocked on the door, and Tom answered it and said, oh, hi, Peter, and so, and hey, nice to see you, come in, and I said, okay, Tom, I said, this is, I'm not going to say her name because, number one, I actually am not sure what it was, and number two, I prefer not to involve people in this story if I haven't got their permission. And so I said, okay, Tom, this is so-and-so, you've seen her and stuff, but she really wants to meet you and get to know you, and here she is. See you later. And I walked off down the path and got in my little VW Beetle and headed back into town. And I thought, and I felt so good. I felt so good. I said, yes, you can do it. You can, even though you're in love with this woman, you can actually hook her up with somebody that she wants to be in love with and not feel any pain. In fact, feel really good about yourself because you know you have done the right thing. You know your behavior is correct. And that was, at that point, I knew that I had gained, and I believe I was 21 at the time, I knew that I had gained control of my emotions, and I was, and that was a wonderful thing and would make my life a lot easier from then on. And the happy ending to all this is that I'm pretty certain the lady friend and Tom got married. And I'm sure if they did, they had a wonderful marriage, because they were both very, very sweet. I hope they still are very, very sweet people. And anyway, that was the story of how I went through a couple of traumatic breakups where my emotions were not under control, and how I determined that I was going to take control of my emotions, and how I then, after a period of, if you like, vigilance, emotional vigilance, I actually did gain control of my emotions, and I fell in love and got out of the relationship and felt really good about it. And that marked a turning point in my life, my emotional development, and it's a turning point that I look back on with gratitude. And anyway, that's the story of how I gained control of my emotional aspect of my emotional body, and that's what it's all about. So I had, to a certain extent, achieved control over my intellectual body, and I emphasize to a certain extent, and I'd also, through my athleticism, extended and gained control over my physical body, and now I had also extended, utilized, watched, observed, and gained control over my emotional body, which in some ways is probably the most important of all the three. So anyway, there you are. That's my latest episode of Autobiography of Cosmic Jake, and we'll see you again shortly. Thank you.